there was huge news in the ACC. So ACC, Florida State and Clemson reached a settlement. Now this has been like kind of hanging over college sports for 2 years, actually probably more than that. Everyone's wondered, hey, is the ACC going to break open? Are Florida State and Clemson's lawsuits going to be successful and invalidate the grant of rights? Is there any way that they can pay whatever the dollar figure is going to be and then get to the Big Ten or the SEC? We've had these like hypotheticals for a long, long time. And everyone has wondered, like, is the ACC going to survive this? Well, the answer is yes, for at least like 5 years, because they reached a settlement here, which I think we'll talk about like if we think there are winners or losers in the actual agreement. But here's what it was. The penalty to leave the conference has now been significantly reduced. The grant of rights remains in place through 2036. But starting next year, the exit fee starts to decrease. So it's $165 million next year, and then it declines by $18 million per year. And when you get to 2030 and 2031, it's $75 million. Big number, but like that is an approachable number compared to the numbers that we've seen and the estimates that like FSU's lawyers had come up with about what it would take to leave right now. If you leave in 2030 and you pay that $75 million, you can leave with your media rights intact. So, you can like immediately, your new league can play your games and the value is there. That the timing of that exit penalty reduction is really important. So the Big Ten's media deal comes up around then. The Big 12's media rights deal comes up again around then. The CFP deal comes up. ESPN's deal with the SEC a couple years later. And also the NCAA's deal with March Madness, men's and women's, all up around then. So I've already been saying that like the end of the decade is a very significant period of time for like full on shifts and changes possibly with the business model. One other piece to this is that like there's a new revenue distribution model. We know the ACC had already gone to like a success-based thing. Like if you win or made the CFP, you get to keep more money. Now you also get some more money because of your brand initiative and recent viewership, so that the teams that are drawing and carrying the football product will get paid as such. This is something FSU has been clamoring for a couple of years. So all that being said, what it looks like to me is that you have stability here for a few more years, but you have outlined a path for these teams to leave in 2030. And most changes tend to be around when media rights deals are up. That's when the Big Ten added the last time. That's when the SEC added right around when they were redoing their deal. And I think that if there is going to be a shift to a super league or some sort of breakaway, the top 40 brands, the top 60 brands doing something separately, pulling football out, whatever, all of those, back of napkin math and conversations we've done, I think that it makes sense to if you're Florida State and Clemson, be available around that time. Here's the dollar figure to hit for raising money, whatever you need to do. But also, I think this prepares everyone for that landscape, like that there is a pathway to it if the world looks like it's doable, if media rights look like that's possible. You don't know what that's going to look like yet. You don't know how the House settlement and revenue sharing is going to impact people's budgets and what they want to compete at in college sports. So to me, I think everyone can sell it as a win. Like the ACC can sell it as like we stay together and Clemson and Florida State are still here. But I think if you're Clemson and Florida State, you feel great about this outcome. You're getting more money in the short term, and you've got a clear exit ramp if you want to take it in a few years.
That's how I see it. It feels pretty significant that you now have clarity on what you need to do if there were the opportunity to get out of the conference for Florida State and Clemson. So that's a good thing. I think about some of the teams that are kind of, if you're one of the other teams, especially kind of the bottom of that conference, I don't think any of this makes you feel any better. Your revenue distribution is now going to be probably lower than what you were anticipating. And there's this idea that your conference probably will not be, however you want to see it, be intact by the time we get to the end of the decade, start the new one. So it's a weird spot. I do think that the pretty clear winners in my mind are Florida State and Clemson here. But I am curious, though, now that we have this, where everybody's mind is going, because you did mention Like, I think if you're the Big Ten, for example, you can't take on any more teams unless you want to get in the business of cutting teams out. The way the schedules are right now, they're too imbalanced in football. The conference is entirely just like too big for it to make a lot of sense. So you probably do have to turn the page to, are we going to do a just like a different division of football with, you know, different regional conferences that overlap with scheduling and different things that happen there? That's what I'm curious about now, is the shift in mentality for some of these other conferences and some of the top teams and what they think business is going to look like in the future.
So it's a really good point about like the other teams in the leagues and the teams towards the bottom, like the least valuable ones, because I think that this outcome for the ACC doesn't happen if the Pac 12 doesn't implode,
Right.
because those schools had an unequal revenue distribution with the LA schools where they made more money. And they fought back and they went back to an equal revenue distribution. And like everyone knew that USC and UCLA were unhappy, especially USC. But there was that like push towards it and it got overruled. And then they left, and that, began the crumbling of the Pac 12. And so I think you had teams and schools and administrators who saw that happen. They don't want to be Washington State and Oregon State, where they just completely get left behind and have to rebuild at a lower level. And so they're like, yeah, okay, fine. We will. Yes, Florida State and Clemson can make more money. Like, they are investing at a higher level. They're more successful on the field. So yes, we will do that to preserve the league, which does not set you up well for your future, especially when you are going to be having this new line item of paying the players and the rev share piece. But I think it's to preserve the league, to have a home.
Survival.
And again, you have deadlines now. Like, you
Yeah.
have a period of time where you can make decisions. You need to fundraise. If you need to think about dropping down a level, like to your point, or cutting different sports to, maneuver things the way that you want as an athletic department, you know what you need to do by then. And the ACC has always been a weird conference where football is driving so much of where college sports is going, but there's so much basketball history in this
Yep.
league. And like, you again have the Florida States and Clemsons with the football spending, salaries, all of that. And then you have like Boston College that like doesn't even have scholarships for swimming. So like, you have such a wide range of what are we doing here? What is our goals? That I think it was always going to be an interesting and strange dynamic. But the fact that you open the door to unequal revenue sharing in this conference gets to the point that you said, either about cutting teams or changing the revenue distribution in other leagues where certain teams are really carrying it, right? Or they're the ones that are the most valuable teams. They drive the viewership. They drive the reason that, Fox and ESPN and everyone's willing to spend so much on the media deals, because, they want the Ohio State. Like, so Ohio State, should they make the same amount as Purdue? That
Right.
like that question does come. I don't know. I feel like a bunch of people were like, oh, immediately, like the Big Ten, the SEC will do unequal revenue sharing. I don't know if that's true, because I think in the Big Ten, I think like the even sharing is part of like the ethos of the conference.
Yes, it
Same
is.
in the SEC, and it incentivizes investment for everybody else
Yep.
by bringing in money. So I don't think that's like a clear cut thing, but it definitely is a conversation now, because we just saw it happen in the ACC. And a lot of people think at some point people will be like, here's what I bring. I should get paid what I bring relative to what my neighbor brings.
It's so tough for me because I understand the business and I understand how these things work, and how people would feel, administrators, right? Like coaches, how they feel about their programs. But the word cutting is really tough for me, right? Like, if you're kind of kicking teams out of conferences, that's tough. And the idea of what happens in these athletic departments at Ohio State, I think it was 36 varsity sports, right? And like, they have tried to say that we're committed to making sure that we can have all these sports. There are other athletic departments that are large like that. And I became a lot of friends with a lot of athletes from other teams that had opportunities to be on campus because of what they did and the fact that there was a sport that they could play there. And I struggle with those opportunities potentially evaporating in this changing landscape. So I think that's the other side of it that's like really tough about all these things, as we look at it and we're kind of trying to make the math work and seeing the way that the pieces fit in. But there are young people who want to go to school and want to be a part of a sport that have had opportunities for a very long time that might not in the future because of the way that shifts are happening in collegiate athletics.
Yeah, I always say this, I repeat myself, but I think it's worth it. Like, this is not a business model you would set up if you started it today. You would
No.
never have, one or maybe two sports essentially bringing the money to subsidize everything else.
Yep.
And you wouldn't do it with the conferences either, where like a couple of them kind of,
Right.
again, subsidize everybody else. Like, because it wasn't supposed to be like a major business, right? Like, this was about like providing opportunities and scholarships for athletes.
Yeah.
And that goes out the door when coaches are making 10 million,
I
$11
know.
million a year,
It's
and March Madness is $1 billion entity. And
man,
so it's not set up to operate and maximize like
I know.
profits and margins and all of the different things that you would if you set it up differently as a business, which is why you have these super league proposals where people
I
are like, we
know.
could extract so much more money out of this.
I struggle because I believe that there are certain institutions that do not need to be businesses and should not operate with the business like mentality. And to your point, for a very long time, nobody was really getting rich off of collegiate athletics. Coaches were not getting rich. The TV was not as big as it is. You couldn't watch every game every weekend on television somewhere. And to your point now, TV contracts absolutely ridiculous. I benefit from this, by the way. I cover the sport, so it's not like I'm not getting a piece of the pie here. Some of these coaching contracts, you got position coaches making over $1 million a year. You ask a guy in the 80s about that, he would probably faint and tell you that you're crazy. But this is a world that we're in right now, and I can appreciate it, but I also feel like certain things don't have to be a business. This
Yeah,
has to be now.
unfortunately,
We're
this
past
does.
the point of return, right? Like
Yeah. Oh,
there's
well past it. Yeah. And,
yeah.
that's why you have, these people hiring GMs with
Yep.
pro sports backgrounds who understand cap management. It's why you have athletic directors and commissioners coming from pro sports and other
Yep.
areas. Like, it is becoming more and more of that, but this is exactly the kind of space where like there's so much tension, especially around decisions that might be cutting sports and those
Yep.
opportunities, which again, people who work in college sports or devoted their whole life to working in college sports did it because they believed in those things.
Yes.
So this stuff becomes very, very challenging as we get closer to the House settlement being implemented. And again, these questions about an eventual super league.